The first slide. So if you could back up a bit, but yep, we see your presentation. There you go.
Thanks, Annie. Hey, good morning, everyone. As Annie said, I'm Lisa Herger. I am the Mapping and Regulations Coordinator with the Critical Area Commission staff. I have had the pleasure of working with some of you on the call just through doing the mapping update for your various towns and municipalities. It's nice to see you all here this morning. I have been selected, I'm not sure why, by my colleagues to present the comprehensive review training. This is our 5th training in a series for municipalities, and I hope that I do it justice. Joining me today, and she's already introduced herself, is Diane Clare, who's the planner with the City of Havre de Grace. And we selected Diane because she and I worked together collaboratively when the city did their comprehensive update just a few years ago. So she's going to be speaking to you in a few moments. I will get into my presentation now, but if anyone has a burning question, please raise your hand and we will get to you, or we can wait until the end, whatever is your preference. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Today, I'm going to go over the basic elements of a comprehensive review. So many of you know that we have a model ordinance. And we're not going to go through that model ordinance today. We're going to speak about it or speak to it. But we kind of want to go through the basic steps to make sure that we're all on the same page as far as when a town initiates a comprehensive review. So the first thing we're going to walk you through is the actual process for when you are updating your local critical area ordinances. And then we're going to talk about required components that the commission staff and the full commission will need to see when you present it to the commission. I will go over some alternative standards that local governments can put in their codes that are very specific and can customize your program to fit your local jurisdiction's needs. And then finally, we're going to have a question and answer session with Diane Clare from the City of Havre de Grace. The reason that we do what we call a comprehensive review is because the critical area law in natural resources, Article 8-1809G, requires local jurisdictions to update their programs at least every 6 years. And the commission staff refer to these updates as the critical area comprehensive review. So it's kind of like when you all do reviews of your comprehensive plans. This is specifically targeted, as you might imagine, to your critical area program. Now, when we say program, that could mean many things for different jurisdictions. So some of you may have all of your critical area requirements that you apply to properties in the critical area in your subdivision code and or your zoning code. It could be in grading ordinances. Basically, any ordinance that has any critical area requirements is what we want you to review every 6 years. There also are some jurisdictions out there who have what's called a critical area program document. So it's not codified in your code necessarily. It could be by reference. It varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. But that program document is also an important document that needs to be updated along with the code requirements, because some of those program documents are written so detailed in the beginning. They might specify certain acreages that the county or that the city or town had, and those might need to be updated. So that's another place that you might want to look when you're kind of scanning through all of the critical area related items that you're going to need to look at to see if they need to be updated. And, you know, as I'm going to repeat a lot through this presentation, if you're not sure or you want to just double check, I'm always going to encourage you to reach out to the local planner here in our office, and we can assist you with that as well. And the reason that we do this every 6 years is because, as you all are aware, because I'm a regulations coordinator and I speak to you every couple months or every couple years, we update our regulations. So we need to get those updated in your local codes. And also there could be changes to the law. Now, there haven't been any recently that are substantive, but we would let you know if that would happen, and we would make sure that those are incorporated as well. So the update is also going to include amendments possibly to your local zoning maps. So that's something else we're going to talk about in a moment. There are specific submittal requirements and components of that that kind of need to be checked off, if you will, when you're preparing for and during and ultimately submitting your comprehensive review to the Critical Area Commission for our final review and approval. And they include the things you see on your screen. So I'm going to give you some examples of all of these, but the first one is a statement from the local government, from your planning office, could be from your mayor, could be from you, that certifies that the comprehensive review has been completed. And then we're going to also ask at the same time that you include any additional requests besides the comprehensive review itself for either program amendments or refinements to be considered. So at the time that you're doing your comprehensive review, like cavity grade, they were also updating the clinical area maps. So that was another component of their submission to us. In their case, that might not be the case for you. You might not be simply updating the clinical area code and program. We're also going to ask for an updated resource inventory, and I'm going to explain in a little more detail to you what that means in a few moments. And then finally, we're going to ask for a statement that quantifies the acreages of each land classification. So how many acres you have in the resource conservation area, how many acres are in your limited development areas, and how many acres are in your intensely developed areas. And also any growth allocation number. So that would include what you started out with when your program was initially approved, probably back in the late 80s, early 90s, then any debits that have come off of that balance, and then a remaining balance. So on your screen, you're going to see a couple of letters or examples of what were in fact cover letters sent by various local governments to the commission staff that address the following points. So these are things we're going to want to see in the letter, and they include the date that your local commissioners or councilmen actually heard your comprehensive update, the date that it was actually approved by that body, and then the specific either bill or resolution number that was assigned to this particular piece of legislation through your local body. And finally, a request to the commission for the commission to process the whole package, the legislative package, as either an amendment or a refinement to your local program. And there are two different processes that the commission has available that you can request us to use. One is more abbreviated, and I'm not going to get into the details of amendments or refinement requests today, but you can definitely reach out to us when you're at that point, and the local critical area, our critical area commission staff can be happy to assist you in what would be the correct request. So I mentioned the natural resources inventory update. And when you believe that you're going to initiate your comprehensive review of your critical area program, it's really, really important to reach out to commission staff, either Claudia Jones, who's the commission science advisor, who does this coordination, or it could be the critical area planner that you're paired up with, either one. But you want to let them know you're starting so that the commission staff can initiate a request with the Department of Natural Resources to do a natural resources inventory update for your specific jurisdiction. And the reason for that is it takes, DNR has a list that they're going through now of some jurisdictions that are currently within their comprehensive updates, and some of them include counties, which takes, as you might imagine, a while longer. But if we can get you in their queue early, it will pretty much guarantee that we'll have your updated natural resources inventory ready when you all are ready to take it to your local body for local approval. So this inventory includes any type of rare, threatened, or endangered species that were noted in your jurisdiction, maybe either at the time of your initial program update, or maybe you've done subsequent updates. But every time that you do a comprehensive review, it's important to reach out so we can get the natural resources inventory updated. You may not have any updates, but we're going to check with DNR, and then we will get that data to you as soon as possible, so you know what you have going on in your jurisdiction. The other item that I spoke about was acreages totals. So some of you who have already gone through your critical area map update may have these already. If you do not, either because you haven't gone through your update yet, or they weren't provided for some reason, we can provide you with this information. So another reason to reach out early, we can do these calculations for you and provide them to you. As far as the growth allocation acreages, the amounts and that used in that remaining, Mike Grassman on our staff is the person that coordinates these figures for the entire critical area, so every jurisdiction. So you can always feel free to reach out to Mike if you're unsure, but either way, it's a good idea to reach out so we can compare our spreadsheets and make sure that they are matching before you get to the point where you're taking your legislative package to your local commissioners or council. So now I'm going to talk about the model ordinance. Some of you have had experience with this. We've had model ordinances before. This one is updated through 2022. In 2023, back in March, we updated some regulations that have to do with shore erosion control. We haven't changed anything substantively in those regulations, and we will update the ordinance to include that. Basically, it changes terminology, which has the same definition from shore erosion control to shoreline stabilization, just to give you a little taste of what those regulations entailed. However, the model ordinance is on our website. So if you go to the Commission's website on the right-hand side of your screen, if you look down the list, there's the local government resources tab that you can click on. And when you get there, you can scroll through. And in addition to the previous trainings that we've done for towns that are posted, you're also going to see a whole bunch of other stuff, forms that you can use. But the model ordinance is posted up there, and the one that you want to choose, because there's two, is the municipal model ordinance, because we also have one listed for the counties. So in your case, if you will choose the municipal model ordinance. And the one thing I want to point out about the model ordinance, I said I wasn't going to talk a lot about what's in it. You guys can kind of guess what's in it. It's the regulation. But there are components in the model ordinance that may not be applicable to your particular municipality. So again, this is a model, and it's used, or it should be used, as kind of an outline for you or a guide to go through and kind of check off like the things that need to be updated in your code. The other nice thing about the model that staff put together, and Charlotte Sheeran was, and Pete Charbonneau did a lot of work on this, is we have footnotes in there that are really very instructive to you. So there might be instances where you can choose between different options of what to put in your code, and it's very well laid out and explained in there. So I think it's a really good resource for you all to use, and it's readily available, like I said, on our website. Just keep in mind, again, that it is a model, and it can and should be customized to fit your local needs. So you don't or probably shouldn't adopt it. You really should look through it, and commission staff again can help walk you through it to determine, what components are most applicable to your specific needs. Now, there are certain sections that are going to be applicable to all, like the one you see on your screen, the buffer. The Part 4 modified buffer areas will depend if your town has those, right? So you kind of get the idea. It's really dependent on what you have going on in your specific municipality. So that kind of lends into flexible provisions. So over the years in our regulations and to some extent in our law, there have been certain flexible provisions written into those documents. So you can write provisions that have to do with growth allocation, non-adjacency standards, right? So for those of you who have recently done a growth allocation, I'll say recently, in the past 10 to 15 years, there's a provision that requires that new IDAs be adjacent to existing IDAs or LDOs. However, you can write what we call a non-adjacency standard into your local ordinance if you choose. It's not required, but you may find that the way that your town is developing or where you think there might be future growth for an intensely developed area, it might not meet that adjacency standard. So you can write alternative provisions as long as the slide says, those provisions are at least as effective as local law says you should do. And we have done these with some other local governments through the years. So again, we're going to hear this a lot. Your local critical areas or your critical area staff here at the commission are going to be really an important resource for you to reach out to find out, well, how do I write one of those if I think I want to do that? Give me some examples and we can provide those to you. The same thing with buffer provisions. Yes, you can write alternative buffer provisions. Now you can't make it less than 100 feet, right? But there are some things that apply to the buffer. For example, if there's a site plan or a subdivision in a resource conservation area, the regulations require there be a minimum 200-foot buffer. And in some cases, if someone is subdividing a parcel that has an existing dwelling on it, that 200-foot buffer might not work on what we call the parent parcel, that is where the existing dwelling is, because maybe that dwelling is set back 100 feet, right? So you can't apply a 200-foot provision. So there's ways to work with that. And we, again, can provide you with some example language or work with you for your specific needs. There's also flexible provisions for resource conservation area uses. So in every jurisdiction, there might be some type of use that might be considered commercial, which, as most of you know, isn't a use that's allowed in the resource conservation area. However, if it's a certain classification or if it's a certain scale, they can be written into your local code. So an example could be home occupation. There could be folks who have some kind of business that they run out of their home. They might be in a resource conservation area, but they're not going to expand that business in footprint or the type of traffic or, you know, it's a very kind of very not intense use that happens. There are bed and breakfasts that are out in the resource conservation area. So if you work with the local commission planners here, we can help guide you through those if you have some questions about some uses that might occur if you have RCA in your jurisdictions that you'd like to address, and we'll be happy to talk to you about those. We also have flexible provisions related to the fees in lieu. We all are aware that the buffer requires a fee if you have to collect one for mitigation. There is flexibility for that. We've had jurisdictions that have wanted to increase the fee beyond what is written in our regulations, and we've had at least one or two that wanted to lower the fee given local circumstances. Those are things we can talk about. So reach out early. Happy to talk to you about those. Finally, I have on the list climate resiliency. We have worked with specifically the town of Oxford, and in our last municipal training, there was a question and answer time with Cheryl Lewis from the town of Oxford. And we worked successfully with Oxford in addressing some flooding issues that occurred regularly within the town. And we worked with her through her comprehensive update. We made some adjustments specific to the town of Oxford. And so far, things are going well with that. And it's something that the town saw a need for and identified. And we were happy to get creative and figure out ways to incorporate the critical area requirements, but also address the flooding issues in that particular jurisdiction. So again, happy to work with anyone who sees a need for some type of flexibility, but reach out early. So that kind of segues into the collaboration point, which, you know, I've been preaching to you for the last, 10 or 15 minutes or 20 minutes or so. Reach out to us early and often. We are here for you. That's one of our, main purposes is to assist local governments in implementing and enforcing their critical area programs. So we're really happy to reach out and discuss the comprehensive review when you're in that process. So, that we can make it customized as best we can to meet the local needs and to help you all administer the program more easily and effectively. That's our goal. So, of course, we're able to meet and discuss these things at any time. I can share a little story with you. Diane and I had initiated the City of Havre de Grace's comprehensive review right before COVID happened. And then March 2020 came. And we had to have meetings. And, we can do things like this online. But we found it a lot more efficient to do it in person. So we met out at a picnic table in the town. And even though we don't have those restrictions anymore, we'll still meet at picnic tables. So we'll come out and meet you wherever you need us to be. We're also available, just so you know, to attend the town commissioners or your town council meetings. So if you want to, we're happy to come along with you and either do a presentation to describe the critical area and talk about the comprehensive review, because we know when you have elections and people turn over, you have new commissioners or new town council members that you might need to educate. And we're always happy to do that even outside of a comprehensive review. So please keep that in mind. And of course, we're available to review drafts. So if you have a draft and you want us to take our gander, we're happy to do that as well. So keep those things in mind. If anybody has any questions, I can take them now, or I can open up the floor to Diane. Anyone? Okay. If you think of something, just raise your hand at any time. I'd be happy to address any questions you might have. So welcome, Diane, again. Diane Clare from the City of Havre de Grace. And we're just going to go through some things that were typical, at least for our process, her and I, when we worked together on their comprehensive review. So one of the things that, I kind of harped on during this whole thing was early coordination. And I thought I would just, ask Diane about how that worked out for her and any other things that she might want to add or let her colleagues know in the other jurisdictions here that are on the call.
I was going to say our early coordination was key to our whole process. And you really can't do it alone, or at least you shouldn't. I couldn't do it alone. I leaned on Lisa a lot for her expertise. They're the knowledgeable and trained personnel to see this through. So they are your friends. And I would call her early in the process and called her often. And we did meet along the way. And as much as I needed to make it happen, our program's a little different than most. We're entirely IDA with a little bit of RCA on our public lands. And our program is also, our IDA is all modified buffer. So we had some very unusual circumstances that we were trying to tailor the model ordinance to. And because of that, I really had to lean heavily on how to make it work within the constructs of the state law and still keep our tailored elements alive. That was very important to us.
Yeah, so there was a lot of uniqueness, if you will, to Diane's program. And I know that occurs, out there with some of you all. So, keep that in mind that we're able to tailor things like I mentioned in the slides. The other thing I wanted to kind of talk to Diane about is her experience with the model ordinance, which
it was in flux. But
yes, it was in flux. In her case, we were still trying to catch up with regulations we were doing. But if you could just speak to the model ordinance and what your experience was with using that.
It was very helpful. We use that as our basis, but we also had to create our own elements to meet the pieces of our program that were unique. So we could pick and choose the model pieces from the model ordinance entirely. For instance, we don't have any LDA, so that section completely drops out. We won't have the opportunity in the future for LDA, really. Our entire shoreline was mapped IDA historically in the 80s, and we've carried that forward with the exception of some RCA, as I mentioned, in the public lands. But the model was truly a great resource, and we sort of move things around as we needed them to make it logical for our program. And then we embedded, we have an unusual critical area taxing district, which was also created as part of our initial program, and we had to put those pieces in there. But it certainly is the basis for our new ordinance is the model.
Yeah, and I was wondering too if you could kind of speak to like what your actual local process was that you had to get it through before you actually sent it to us.
Well, the local process ended up being interesting because we were first doing the digital mapping, and then we were going public with the digital mapping just as COVID struck. That was April 2020, and that shut down a lot of things, and everybody had to reorient to get on board with the changing life circumstances. So our mapping ended up getting delayed just a little bit while you guys were figuring out the digital process for the mapping. And in the meantime, I ended up getting, since I had so much forced time at home, to get involved in our program review. So it was very interesting timing, but the two ended up flowing very well together. And our local process from there, after we kind of got our footing, they ended up paralleling each other very nicely, and we went through our normal process, a lot of it virtual, but for instance, we had planning commission review for both pieces. Now, albeit the two pieces, the digital mapping and the comp review, were going along parallel, but we ended up having planning commission review and a normal process for city council review with a series of public meetings and adoption. And by the time we ended up getting the digital mapping handed to us in November of 2020, we ended up getting, because there was so much front end work done, we ended up getting our program and the mapping all adopted locally within a year. So by October 2021, we ended up managing to get that whole process through, and then finally to the planning, the critical area commission, early January 2022. So it was a lot of front end work, a lot of public education along the way to lead up, and then we got the hiccups with COVID, but we managed to kind of roll with it.
Yeah, that definitely was very impressive, the way that all worked out locally as we were watching. So kudos to Diane for that. Also,
I think they were tired of hearing me talk about critical area for so long. Actually, they were just like happy to pass it. Let's go.
So I also, in your case, we talked about, looking at kind of checking off when you're starting your comprehensive review, like what are the ordinances? Do I have a program document? What is it I need to like veer into and figure out like what I need to do? And so for some jurisdictions, that could be edits, and for others, it could be a complete repeal and replacement of those sections if you're going to be doing, some fairly creative work. So do you want to speak to how that worked out in your particular instance?
Ours ended up being a repeal and replace. We had too much that we needed to go back and do. We were overdue for a comprehensive review anyway. We had major sections that needed to be built in, specifically the buffer regulations that were passed in 2010 and 2012. We were well out of date, and we were incorporating those in our administration, but we didn't have it within our local law. We ended up having a total repeal and replace because there were so many major sections that needed to be incorporated. Still leaning on the past work, and this is where it gets really interesting, is trying to internalize state law and how it relates to local ordinances and the way our program had developed historically. We absolutely needed to keep what we were already founded on and those elements, but then trying to tailor it and then improve our overall ordinance to incorporate the buffer regulations that were required. So it was an interesting process, but it was a total overhaul, and it was very timely with the mapping that had gone forward. So did I answer your question?
You did, and it actually leads into my next one very well, which is, besides the total repeal and replace, just because of the timing and how things have developed historically in Havre de Grace, there were some special provisions that you all have in your program. If you want to kind of give examples of how that worked in your instance.
Special provisions which were created at the onset of the program. We're entirely modified buffer in our IDA, which is extensive. And then the critical area taxing district, all that language carried forward from the past. We would have had a lot of opposition if we didn't keep those elements that were specific to Havre de Grace's tailored program. So I've been involved with 2 comprehensive reviews now, and the last time was a lot more challenging than this one. People had settled into the requirements and the ongoing refinements of state law to have them embedded in the local ordinances. And it's really important to have the 2 align, because it's hard to not have it as a tool to point to locally. If you don't have it written in your ordinance, but you still have to administer the law as it's written now by the state.
Yeah, so like as Diane said, in their case, they did have special provisions already built into their program. One of the things, besides special provisions, we talked about flexibility, and one example in Havre de Grace, which I can foresee being similar in some of the municipalities out there in the critical area, is the modified buffer area. Some of you may still be referring to them as buffer exemption area, same thing. The idea is there is a modified setback. Instead of 100 feet, it's a reduced setback because you had historic development patterns already occurring within that 100-foot buffer prior to the adoption of your initial program back in the late 80s. So some of you have those already incorporated into your local ordinances. In the case of Havre de Grace, we do have a policy on modified buffer areas and the setbacks, and the commission's policy has 2 different setbacks depending on if it's redevelopment or new development. It's either 25 feet or 50 feet. But in the case of Havre de Grace, Diane and I looked at their historic patterns, and that just wasn't a workable setback. So we did a special provision in Havre de Grace where their setbacks are different, which our commission, their local body approved and our commission approved. So those are things to keep in mind. I think, Diane, are yours 10 and 25 feet? I'm not remembering, but they're a reduced setback, which is an example that we have with Havre de Grace of how we can work on alternative provisions, which is a customization for what you all have going on in your local code, or actually on the ground in your local towns.
Yeah, it's 15 and 25. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Just because of existing circumstances on some fronts.
Yes. Is there anything else that you had that you might want to note to anybody? Any challenges? Or I think you noted how it was a challenge to kind of educate your city council members and the public and bring them up to speed on what this actually was, so.
Well, it's always challenging to explain critical area in general, and certainly to apply it locally, but defending state law. So it's really just important to distill it to its essence as far to the public when I'm working with property owners, that it has to do with water quality and habitat, and just it's just important to do as much front end work with the public as well, to explain it along the way, whether it's you know, how to apply the law on the individual properties, or trying to explain the ordinance to council members and to our own staff here, why it's important, why it's there to begin with. So it's challenging. I'm sure everybody on the call realizes how multi-layered the critical area law is, and it's sometimes challenging to explain, but it's interesting. So it's very interesting to keep moving it forward. But comprehensive reviews are very necessary as far as having the fallback of the local ordinance to reach to and to reference when you're applying it as well. So
That's a very good point. Yes. Thank you, Diane. Does anyone have any questions of either Diane or myself? I'm not seeing any hands raised. Well, we're available, commission staff, anytime. Reach out to us, and again, early. We appreciate that, and we can get resources to you to help you move it along, and we're always available. Thanks everyone for attending today. We will have this posted on our commission website in a few days. Thank you again, Diane, very much for agreeing to come on and speak with your colleagues about your experience.
You're very welcome. It was great.
Well, with that, I think I will say goodbye, and I hope everyone has a good afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you, Diane, very much.
Diane.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.